to our wonderful panelists, or perhaps discussing a bit more about the child rights impact assessment. Yeah, two.
Thank you.
I'm Sandra from Hong Kong University Department of Social and Social Administration, also a member of the Commission on Children. Just a point of information, some of the department members of my department, Professor Paul Yip is leading a study on Divorce Studies 2018 in Hong Kong. And we are lining up 11 NGOs and also a number of law firms to study what are some of the issues related to divorce and maintenance and this and that. So I'm very happy that Dennis is talking about setting a timeline here and there and then. So I just want to mention this. There is another something wobbling up somewhere, and then maybe all the guests on the stage will be invited to enlighten when we want to push our recommendations forward. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. I see one person there. And
Hi. A lot of practitioners review that.
Sorry to interrupt. Could you perhaps introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Hermia Heyu. I'm from this school. I am. So a lot of practitioners review that children are very loyal, especially the younger children, to their parents. Even the parents are abusing them. So in this case, we can see that parental rights ought to be intervened in some ways if we want to have the children visible in policy level. So I was wondering, as you are all leaders of your own profession, I just wonder what is the extent that you're willing to intervene into parents and their private family life, and especially, lawyers, they have their clients as their parents instead of the children. So how are you going to balance, and how much are you going to prioritize children's best interest in this sense? Because, children's best interest is only a primary consideration, not the primary consideration. So I just wonder how you guys are going to respond to this question.
Thank you so much. I can take another question. I'll take sets of two. So if anybody else has a question for a panelist, please raise your hand. Okay. Then I'll just invite the panel.
Well, let me go first. It's as a family lawyers, I always say that a good family lawyers, even though we are representing either of the parents, we have a duty towards children. And we always sort of remind parents that they have to take care of their child's interests, not simply fighting for the rights of the child, of a parent to get custody of the child or get care and control, sort of daily care of a child. So we are, I think, in a way that we need to remind all lawyers dealing with family works that they have these sorts of duties towards children, and look at the best interests of the children first, not just follow your client's instructions. And so that is why we're hoping to see, as there are more and more lawyers dealing with family cases nowadays, we're hoping to see that they will draft up some sort of code of conduct practice to circulate amongst lawyers that if you do family work, you are reminded to take care of their children's interests. So I think that is one of the ways to deal with it. Now, the other thing is from the judiciary sort of process, judiciary is thinking about introducing, a system called fact-finding hearing, which I mentioned earlier. So whenever there is any sort of allegations of harm or domestic violence against a child, then the court will have to start off a procedure where that the court will first of all find out whether that allegation is true or not. Now, not necessarily all these allegations are true, because one parents want to gain sort of, advance sort of position against the other parents. They will make allegations. But if we don't know whether the allegation is right or wrong, and before that, and then we call for lots of reports, social welfare reports, psychologist reports, that interfere into the children's sort of life and prolong the whole proceedings, which is not in the interest of the children again. So again, I'm talking about the timeline for any fact-finding hearing. That has to be restricted within a certain period of time.
Thank you. Dr. Cho.
Let me open another can of worm. It is oftentimes that parental rights are of main concern. But I also see that parental rights are being used to cover up organizational rights, professionals' rights, self-interest. I'll give an example. There are 3 tiers of SEN, special educational needs students, in the current integration education framework. How are these SEN students classified or assessed to fit in these 3 tiers? One would expect these should be professionals. Now, of course, they are being assessed by educational psychologists, therapists, and so forth. But as to where they are being placed in these 3 tiers, it is the school. Now, the subsidy is structured in a way that the tier 3, which is the most severe level, would receive a higher subsidy, but any 1 to 6 tier 3 students, the school would receive the same amount of subsidy. And as a result, most of the schools who have tier 3 SEN students would only have 1 to 2 of these tier 3 students. It is very miraculous. They don't have a lot, but they usually have 1 to 2. Why is that? And who makes that decision? It's not the educational psychologist. It's the principal. It's the teacher. Now, when it comes to MDCC, what sort of interests do we consider when we determine whether this is a child abuse case? And whose interests do we consider when we consider invoking CRP order? Whose interests are we considering when we say these children should be placed in what sort of residential placements? I've seen cases that they reject admissions. I've seen group homes that are supposed to serve disabled children reject children because of their disability. Well, maybe I deal with the dark side of the world. I don't know. Maybe I do because of my position. I have come to a conclusion that oftentimes we talk all we want about children's best interest, and then we use parental rights to cover up our interests, which is usually paramount concern for those people who have the power to make decisions for the children.
If I can comment on that, right? So, as a medical practitioner, a decision is basically a balance of risk and benefit, right? So, I agree with Fernando, right? So, many times, especially in those MDCC, right, the decision is basically based on the resources limitation. All along, we've been talking to our hospital authority, so our big master, right? But the patient is our best interest is in our heart, right? But then the HA will tell me that the best interest within the resources available, right? That's the thing they say to us, right? I'm not saying that they're wrong, because the resources are limited, right? So we are serving 7 million. How should we distribute all these resources, right? There's also an ethical sort of a dilemma among the professionals. Right, so many times I do agree with Fernando. When I'm attending many years back, all those MDCC, the decision of the social worker or whatever here is basically there's no space available. Right. So, and also the other balances between a child in a poor family or whatever. I'm not poor in the sense that not favorable to the development of a child, right? Compared to a foster care home or to an institution. How should we balance all this? Well, eventually, the child may be placed in the hospital for a long time. Right? So all this is not just basically the best interest, but then best interest within the available resources. In that context, that's the dilemma. So that's why many a time when we are talking about a one-time age or criminal responsibility, the objection is not coming from the public. It's coming from a professional. Because there's no resources. Once you because in the past, when you're 10 or whatever, when you're under the criminal investigation, the legislation requires that clinical service, whatever, will be available. But then once you're not in that system, there will not be any services. So all these are interlinked, right? So I totally agree with Lendo. It's a lot of problem, not just facing the outside. Right, so I should stop here.
May I also add on that? Because so right that these two panelists talk about this resources, capacity of the organization or government. Like you mentioned about MDCC, right? So the setup of the relevant service units, do they have enough social workers? Do they have enough resources? Similar things like there are children or youth who are really at risk, and we have to, take them out of the home and then, settle them in residential care services. But is there enough residential unit? Like, for example, if you look for temporary respite or places or this kind of places, you'll find nothing. It's very difficult for a social worker to identify a place for that. That, in fact, is a resource capacity. It has to go back to the resources that the government or the relevant stakeholders will be willing to put in to ensure that whenever we talk about rights to be defended or to be the interests to be defended, we have to have this kind of resources available. And this morning we talked about Children Commission, right? When the government was talking about setting up this Children Commission, I have never heard that how much resources they are going to devote to support this commission. When you, for example, look at Equal Opportunity Commission, they are talking about, every year they are spending about over 100 million of Hong Kong dollars, about 120-something million Hong Kong dollars. Now we are talking about setting up another commission, but you don't have any commitment or anything talking about how much the government is willing to put in. And then if there is no such financial commitment, how can we talk about defending rights, through this Children's Commission? I think we of all this framework or campaign or code of practice that we have talking about, I think it actually ultimately go back to the problem of what kind of policy or resources commitment that our society or our government would like to devote it.
Can I raise one thing? We are talking about parental rights. I just want to remind all of you that what earlier on Fernando mentioned about the Children's Bill. Now, the Children's Bill in fact is introducing that we should emphasize the children's rights as opposed to the parental rights. This is an entire paradigm shift of the concept that the emphasis is on the rights of the children. So the government, as I understand it, hasn't shelved the bill yet. What they are telling us is that they want to wait a bit more time to give more sort of social services sort of in place, and hopefully they can introduce in about a year or 2 years' time. That's what I understand the position. So something like that, we can bear in mind that in future, children's rights should be more in mind of all sectors, whether it's legal, social services, or medical services, they will be looking at the children's right more into it. That's what I hope, and I want to see that to happen.
Thank you each for your very different perspectives and coming from all these multidisciplinary backgrounds. It's been really helpful to hear, but you've been asking us some tough questions and highlighting some limitations of the broader framework, whether that's policy, but also in practice, of course, and with the Commission. So I think that still leaves us with a lot of things to take care of and to think about and to further discuss. But I really hope that the audience can join me in thanking you for your participation and engagement. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists and moderators. So now let's proceed to our second panel session, Adopting Child Rights Impact Assessment as a Guiding Framework in Hong Kong. Gaps, Opportunities and Challenges. Voices of Frontline Practitioners. May we now invite our panelists to come on stage. They are Mr. Charles Chen Kin Hong, Executive Director, the Boys and Girls Clubs Association of Hong Kong. Dr. Lee Lai Ping, Associate Consultant, Department of Pediatrics and Adolescent Medicine, Princess Margaret Hospital. Mr. Azam Moa, Barrister at Law. Ms. Cindy Peng Xiu Fung, Chairperson, Council of Non-Profit Making Organizations for Pre-Primary Education. And our moderators, Professor Kapai and Mrs. Priscilla Loy Jiang San Kai BBS, Chairperson, Hong Kong Committee on Children's Rights and the former Director of the Against Child, who is also one of the founders of the Hong Kong Committee on Children's Rights and the Macau Against Child Abuse. Mrs. Loy is an advocate for a child perspective in public policies and the best interests of children. Mrs. Loy and Professor Kapai, please.
Hello, everybody. Dr. Fernando Jiang is still here. We are in the same world. And could we have the backdrop of the conference again? Instead of yes. Yeah, not too good. I'm not functioning too well.
Testing, testing.
Thank you. We can all see the 5 children there. Colorful 5 children. Dr. Fernando's remark stimulated us to think that what kind of world are these children in? Where are they running from? Where are they running towards? Are they running from those hands? Violence is one of the issues. One of the fundamental issues that we are very concerned. We've been talking about. Are they running away from those hands? Whose hands are those? Are those hands, or one of those hands, belong to us? Have we been urging our children, pushing them too much? Not by beating, spanking them, but the way that we've been treating our children. Perhaps it's like an invisible hand, pushing them or pushing them away. Or are these children actually running towards a beautiful playground? And I learned that in the Netherlands, they have 70 inclusive playgrounds. And in Hong Kong, it's a good news that we are starting one. It is slow, We don't know about this coming one, whether it's really inclusive, is working, but there is light. So hopefully, all of us who are sitting here, we do see some light. And if we don't, the children will not be able to do that. So by having this, the best interests of children, safeguarding children, we are coming to a fundamental point. When we come to them or meet them in a day-to-day basis, if we suspect any concerns, whether we take any actions or we just sit back and watch and talk to each other, complaining about the situation, or there are things that we can actually do. We have our very experienced panelists, and we have you, ladies and gentlemen. So I hope, because of the time constraint, I will go straight into it. Can we have the case being put up? We have a case of a 4-year-old and a 2.5-year-old. So after talking about policies, theories, and so on and so forth, now there are children, 2 very young children, and in the government's data released yesterday, 23% of cases, of abuse cases being reported are in the 0 to 2 years old. It's rising, it's getting up. And of course, the situation is always there. Or there may be provocative situation or contributing factors that lead to such a case being reported. So if we suspect a child being harmed, as in this particular case, Victor and Myra, what would our important panelists do? Would you take any action? What are the primary considerations or hesitations? Do you observe any particular areas that we have to take into consideration? Should I help to start the ball rolling? Could I invite Ms. Cindy? Cindy, yeah, to start off.
Oh, thank you. And I think I'm talking in response to the case in the perspective of kindergarten or a nursery school. I think the school in contact with such a case or children who is absent from school for 10 days. I think the school will not let a boy left out just 10 days unattended with absence, because most of the time, if the student absent from school, the class teacher should have contact with the parents on the right morning or the afternoon. On the same day, I think we have to contact with the parents what happens to the children that absent from school. It is not most of us, not because of identifying what is there any abuse case, but mostly we will identify is there any communal disease, illness that happened. That's why I think we won't leave a case behind for 10 days not attended. Mostly, if we cannot connect with the parents within 2 days, teachers will report to the principal. And then we will have a lot of interventions. We have tried our very means to connect with the parents. If not, we will pay home visit and try whether we can locate where is the child. I think we have good engagement with the parents that if the children have any disease or they have to take leave, they will report to the school. That's why a case absent without any prior notice, it will be a case with odd situation. That's why we will take very serious positions to look for the children. And then I think it is so cruel to say that most of the kindergarten or the nursery schools won't have their school social worker. Resources always come with tragedies. That's why we will have social workers in coming February. That's why most of the schools won't have their school social workers. And then some of the NGOs will use their own capacities or resources for employing social workers. For our cases, or some of our schools, we have school social workers. Then this case, we'll refer to the school social workers. Or sometimes even though in our previous experience, we find some case we really find with abuse situations, or some of, we will consider whether the case should go to the school social workers or the case should go to the clinical psychologists. That's why some organizations who have the resources to provide additional to the schools, they can have more capacities to work with the case that we are discussing. And then I think teachers are placed with a very important role for early identifications of the needs or risk of the students, of the children. That's why I think training for teachers is very crucial and important. I think no matter the undergraduate training or on-job trainings is also essential, because I think we need to. I think abuse case is not very obvious or very commonly come across by the teachers. That's why I think annual basis training or briefing is important for them, will help them to recapture what they need to know for early identification or risk identifications. I think this teachers training is also essential.
So can you hear me without a microphone? Perhaps you can. Huh? Ms. Fong, Cindy's point is first, do not delay, because there's a 10 days delay. Is that the first point you made? And secondly, there are resources outside the kindergarten nursery. Social workers and network and so on and so forth. Do try to engage them. Is that the point you've made? My question is, what would the kindergarten teachers inside the institution do?
Yeah,
perhaps, yes. Thank you. Perhaps, Mr. Charles.
Yes.
You may wish to elaborate on that. And I just learned this morning, Charles has a lot of experience in the past working with children and young workers in the field of child protection, even chairing and attending MDCCs. MDCC means multidisciplinary case conferences. So could you share with us your experience?
Yes, thank you. For this case, I just want to talk briefly about this case because kindergarten is just starting to have social worker attending there. Is getting to formulate the policy. However, it happens a longer history in secondary school for a long time. So if this case happened in a secondary school, perhaps it's getting to have a more systematic way to handle it because it's just starting to have social work service inside primary school and kindergarten. So we would talk about how is the difference between different schools and the level of service at the provider angle. However, for this case, the investigation in the front line is very important. First, we have teacher identifying the cases, and also immediate report to school principal is very normal. If the school get a social worker inside, it's getting to some social inquiry and learn how to crack the case. Yeah, because we know that we need to, at the investigation, we have a lot of skill set to identify the fact and also how to talk with the kid. Also, we have a skill set to talk with a little kid when they cannot express well. And also some of them are too shy or too protective to their parent or the potential perpetrator. And on the second hand, I want to raise one issue about the training. I want to echo, because the training is highly insufficient in the clinical field for frontline child protection. I didn't recognize any representative from the social welfare department here. Because the major resources for child protection training is for the chairmanship of the MDCC only. Because besides the training from the university, when we come to work to become a social worker or a school social worker or a primary social worker or a kindergarten social worker, for the frontline worker, it's not much training or not systematic and full training for that serious protection procedure and skill training and also the booster training. If we just train the chairman and when the frontline worker without that training and teacher without proper training, it's not easy to implement a proper procedure and operation in the investigation, fact-checking, and also the counseling service. So it's a little bit under-equipped environment for the frontline. And however, we provide insufficient resources. I want to talk to the other angle, at another angle on the meso level. Yeah, because we are putting quite a lot of junior worker to the front line for this clinical post. I think I need to elaborate. It's not the intent of the organization, but the system run that out. Yeah, because the primary school social work and also the kindergarten school social work are running on bidding and some ad hoc base. We cannot stabilize the manpower and the training and the manpower resources in a short time. So experienced worker moving to other posts, for example, secondary school social work, center service, other training posts, and we cannot sustain and keep workers at this position. When we are 20, when we are at the age of 20 or 30, we are at the front line to doing that protection work. We do investigation, risk assessment, and also lining up the social inquiry report. However, when they get a better post, they move and don't stay there. And we train only for the 30 and 40 year of age person to do the chairmanship. However, the chairman cannot get a good enough social investigation and frontline identification. The same may happen in the kindergarten if they cannot pay well. So at the end, we have a high turnover at that field at last, even though we have a good procedure manual and also a good legislation. We cannot keep the best quality of service. Not just to complain. Yeah, I just want to advocate. We need to do some systematic training in the front line and the middle. Also, I echo that I would like to have it systematically have a booster and refreshment for that training. Nowadays, we didn't make sufficient analysis to the case report of the child abuse record. If we got work injury inside our organization, we do analysis after that and then do preventive measure a lot. However, we didn't make any investigation or serious investigation and make reports and do that for education material to the field. Yeah, as a researcher, I would like to know more about the case happened for recent year. Yeah, for example, we have 60 or 70 cases a year. What happened? What is the common pattern for example, the drug abuser parent, for the drunken parent, and also the parents with mental health? Is there higher risk? And what can we do with this group? What additional resources should be spent to this group? This is something more than training. It's some data mining and some research, and do some more continuous training to the field. It's important.
Thank you so much. One point I would like to reflect is that in the Commission on Children, there has been discussed about creating working groups, and one of which would be on the data. and members have been urging for a central data bank. Of course, we will continue to urge for research of different kinds. In fact, Hong Kong has conducted various kinds of research through the various years. But as Charles mentioned, lack of coordination and lack of in-depth studying of the data, very valuable data of children being harmed in different ways, in hidden harm and in more obvious harms. Those are important data and information that the community needs to seriously look at in order to trace trends and characteristics and find ways of resolution for prevention in the future. Thank you very much. Dr. Lee, could you enlighten us to see your views and from your role?
Sorry. Thank you, Priscilla. I think as a pediatrician, I just want to share with you that the child's health and safety is our, yes, the main concern. And this is the day in and day out cases that we have encountered. I was, of course, as a pediatrician, we'll try to do our best to safeguard the safety and then also do the family investigation and to work very closely with medical social workers and also the family workers to see what happens to the child, and also to see whether we can do something to safeguard the welfare of the child. But what I can share with you, the frustration is there is, yes, if they come to the hospitals and we found there is injuries and also there's elements of neglect or abuse, of course, where we are very keen to have a safe place for the child to stay. But during the investigation phase, the only way they can stay in hospital. But the reality is that the angry parents or or the relatives will come to the ward in the middle of the night or after office hour, and then why you not allowing them to the children to go home and make a scene in the hospital and so on and so forth. And then, and also for the police involvement, and as some cases we will involve the police, and then, and for the cases that we they do have the time to do the investigation. But another frustration is that the video interview takes time, sometimes more than 1 week or 2 weeks, and the problem is they have to stay in hospital. They are not allowed to go home. And then another thing is the children may have the influence from other parents. They would like to ask them to telling lies and whatsoever. They won't tell them the truth when they go to the video interview. This is not. This far from this is not the way to protect the child. Not to say the best interest of the child, you know, because they are influenced by the other adults, by other people, and also they would think that, oh, okay, I'm not going to the institute. I want to go home. I want my parents back. So they will do all the things to the child. No matter they are small children, adolescents, they will do all the things to protect their parents or the suspected abusers. This is what we are thinking. There is the frustrations in hospitals, and also for the and another thing is that a multidisciplinary case conference. And when we find that the injuries or the child development is far from satisfactory, we are thinking something is going on, but we can't identify any suspected abusers. The story given by the parents or the caretakers is quite good, quite satisfactory. But the thing is, we just can't let the child go home as like that. But the reality is there's no abuser, and the case is not established, and the final outcome is to let the child will go home as such. Okay. Another and another things I want to share with you is you know that a recent the court case, Ling Yun Lim is our patient. When I first saw him, or our team first saw him, and found that what happened to our society or community? Is it why that would be happen to a child like this? Okay, and also the thing is, basically we really lost the case. We have the first case conference. This is not established, and we saw that there's while the case like this and like that, and the parents telling lies, fooling us around, and all sorts of things, and the because we can't have a very concrete evidence, so that they just want to take the patient away back to China whatsoever. But luckily, we have a very good police force, and then they found some evidence, and then they stop the parents to take away the patient back to China, and then this is the way that I think there's sectorial cooperation, and also the communication is very important, and also is timely. It's not that take very, very long time, and and also I don't think come to the court or to the judge is a way. I mean, this is the last resort, but the interim and then also urgent measures, and also all the different workers and different sectors have a very main focus, and also they help to try their best to help the child. This is very important.
Yes, the Lam Lam Dr. Lee just mentioned. In fact, in the year before, there are 2 Lam Lams, 2 very young girls, being horrifically abused and attacked. And Lam Lam's one of them. And when Lam Lam was admitted in the accident and emergency, I think the health professionals thought that there's a dead body being pushed into the hospital. That was captured in the news. So it's a horrific case that Dr. Lee mentioned in her hospital. So coming back to this case, Mr. Mawa Assam, could you share your views as to how you would tackle or respond to the case?
How I'd react to this case really depends on who I was advising. Because the only way I'm going to come into contact with this kind of case, and I really might be, let's say, through the biological father, expressing some concerns, or a social worker, or from one of the teachers. From a more macro view, I echo everything that's been said by the rest of the panel. The first thing I'd say is that all of these people, whether it's the father, the social worker, or the teacher, they first need to build up resources, cooperation. Maybe one can't expect them that much out of a parent, but certainly out of teachers and social workers. You need to be prepared for these incidents. They will happen. And if you don't have the connections and the resources to take action, then the likelihood is just much less that you will be successful. I echo the point about delay. I would say 10 days absence from school is a matter of... Well, let me first go through the fact pattern here. There are 2 very young children. They are in apparently a high-risk family situation. The older child, although not legally required to attend the kindergarten, is absent without any explanation from kindergarten for 10 days. One of the children displays injuries. The other one displays what might be considered classic signs of abuse. All of this suggests that both children, not merely one of them, are in need of care or protection. And the first thing I would say after delay is that you must consider the whole family context, both of the children, not merely the child who displays immediate signs of physical abuse. Because, and I think this is often missed, certainly on the legal profession side, the effect of witnessing abuse on other children, even very young children, even at the age of 2.5. It's a serious effect, and that may be the cause of that child's, of the symptoms that child is displaying, the younger child. The second thing I would say is that after dealing with if a case is established, after dealing with the immediate need for protection, there needs to be consideration of what is going to be done in the long term, what positive steps are going to be made to rectify whatever has happened. Now, I'll just deal with the advice of what that I would give about what to do immediately. It really depends on which one of these people I was advising, but let's say I'm advising the father. The practicality is that that the father's recourse would be either through the family courts, through the domestic violence application through the district court, or through the high court. And the reality is, purely based on this, although the courts would be very skeptical, it's just a reality. When allegations come from parents, they are viewed with extreme skepticism. I would advise the client, the father, to take the least intrusive necessary step to remove the child during investigation. And what that might be is, I'd say, immediately try to refer the case to the police,